just...
Actually, I will probably. I'm so inquisitive that I'll probably be asking you a lot.
That's fine. Probably be easier for me.
Irv, can you start off by telling us your name and where you're from and a little background about your family?
Okay, my name is Irvin Miller. I was born in the year of 1929 in Targowice, Poland. It was the eastern part of Poland. And my family, we were 6 children. My dad was a businessman. He used to deal with horses, buy and sell horses. We lived in a very small place called Targowice. If you translate that, it's like Commercial Point, just a small town and with hills and 2 rivers. And during the First World War, there are many battles fought in that little town. Don't ask me why, but my mother always remembered the sounds of with bayonets and people dying and screaming and yelling. So those are the stories my mother used to tell me about the First World War.
What city, what country is this in?
This was in Poland. It was Poland till 1939, when the pact was made with Germany, Stalin and Hitler. It became part of the Soviet Union in 1939. At that time, in 1941, the war started with Russia, Germany and Russia. And I vividly remember that day. It was on a Sunday, June the 22nd, 1941. We were in school. There was some kind of a commissar, Russian communist from the Communist Party, that supposed to have made that speech the day it happened.
Before you go into that,
yes.
Can you give us a little more background about your family? Like, how many brothers and sisters do
okay.
you have, and how old, where do you fit in the range?
Okay. We were actually 7 children. I had 4 older brothers. A third older brother passed away, which before I was born. I was told that. So there were 6 of us. I had a sister younger, and a little brother was born right before the war. So I was the youngest of the brothers until my little brother was born in 1939. Okay, when the war started in 1941, and within weeks the Germans came through our little town. I mean, it was just unbelievable, so quick. One of my older brothers was already in the Russian army. He volunteered in 1940. My second older brother escaped when the Germans were marching in. They were afraid because they were at the age 18 and 19. They thought Germans would do more harm to the young people. So they escaped. The second brother escaped. The rest of us, we were leaving our little town. We had a horse and a wagon, and we only went about 5 miles. My father had a friend who had a nice farm. We stayed there about 3 days, and we came back. Soon after, while we were occupied, Ukrainian police were in charge. There were very few Germans. Once they went through, there were very few Germans in our little town, but mostly Ukrainian police, which cooperated with the Germans, and they would come every night and take us outside, the whole family, because of my older brother, because my older brother was in the army and the other one escaped. So they threatened us. They had rifles pointing at us, and this went on for weeks. Soon after
What do you mean what did they threaten?
They would threaten that they're going to kill us. I mean, we were scared, you know, we didn't know what's going to happen. Anybody could do anything, and there would be, you know.
Were they just doing it for the fun of it, or were they wanting something from you?
But they couldn't get anything because my brothers were gone. They just threatened my dad and the rest of the family, harassed us.
Where did they do this?
They did this right in our house. They took us out of the house, lined us up on the wall, outside wall, and they told us they're going to kill us. And they didn't, of course, and this happened.
The Ukrainians?
The Ukrainians, yeah.
Now, was your name?
The Ukraine police.
I don't mean to interrupt.
My name was always Miller. It was never, yeah.
Did you have a Hebrew name?
Yeah, my Hebrew name was Itzhak.
Is that what you went by as a child, or did you?
Yes, they called me Itzhak. Yes, Itzhak. And so this happened for quite a while, and then one day, I do remember that very well, that my father, they came and they said there was a registration in the by the school that all adults should report there. And my father was talking to a neighbor, and I heard him say, and he says, I don't like that. But nevertheless, they just walked to that school. And what they did when they gathered, most of the men, I think at that time it was 155 men, they locked them up and they kept them for about 3 days. And they were locked up on a Friday, which was Tisha B'Av. That's the day that they destroyed the temple. Tisha B'Av is a sad day for most Jews. They fast, and a lot of them used to paint ashes on it. It was just an awful day. But this is the day I'll never forget. It was on a Friday. It was early in the fall. The SS came on trucks with mounted machine guns, and they scattered all over the town, looking in houses. I don't know what they were searching, but if there was any man, the grown person, they took him out. My brother, who was about 3 years older than I, my third older, was sitting in my little brother's crib, and I remember where these SS looked at him several times, like, I mean, you know, like, should we take him or leave him? And they left him. And hours later, we heard machine guns fired. And what happened, they took these men out the night before on a Thursday night, and they dug their own grave, a huge grave. And you know, the police, the Ukrainians had it all ready, and the Germans came in and they killed him. They shot him. And we were told that the graves was moving, people were still alive when they filled it with dirt. The only survivor that was a cousin of mine, that my dad and his father had him hidden, and he came Friday that night. He crawled back. I mean, just kind of came into. His brother was killed. His father was killed. So he was the only survivor. There's a picture in that book. He was in.
From the execution.
No, there's a picture of my cousin that went after he survived. But he survived that particular Holocaust. Yes, he survived that.
Was your father part of that?
My father, yeah. Everybody else was killed except he is the one who survived.
Well, who's that include? Your father? Any of your
My
brothers?
father, no, my brothers were already, you know, one is in the army, one escaped to Russia. My third brother was at home. So my father was the only one. My uncle with his two sons, and one of them is the cousin who survived. The only one out of 155 people. Well,
was he the one that told you what happened? How did you find out?
yes, we knew. Well, we knew what happened. I mean, within a half a mile, we could hear it. You know, but he told us, he filled us in, and some of the Gentiles, some of the Ukrainians who watched it, we knew what went on. I mean, yeah, We knew that yeah, he told us about the grave and everything else, and that my dad and his father had him hidden. So that's how we knew that. And I remember all the women and children were right in the midst of town and screaming and crying and yelling. They knew what went on. We knew what was going on. And soon after that, not soon after that, so we struggled without our parents, without very little food. The only food we could have is by trading whatever goods we had with some of the Ukrainians or Poles, farmers.
Where was your mother?
My mother was, you know, we were at home. We would stay at the house. She was with us.
And what
So it
happened
was
to the
my
horses?
to the
What happened to all the horses?
the horses. The Germans took that. They took them out. We had a cow. They took everything. So we really had nothing left except. So we barely made it. Months later, this was in the beginning of the spring of '42. What they did, they took our little town and moved us to another small community, a small townlet. They combined these two together and they partitioned that second little town, probably less than half of it. And they had all these people in such a small area. We had an aunt in this small other town called Ostrozhets. We stayed with my aunt. There must have been 10 people in one room. It was awful. There was hardly food. There was no food at all. The only way is by sneaking out. I did. I sneaked out of the ghetto. They built a ghetto, like 10 feet high, barbed wire, but 6 inches apart. I used to crawl out and go to a farmer, and I worked for this farmer. He was one-legged man, and he couldn't do much work, so I did most everything. And by the weekend, he would give me some food, potatoes, bread, really not much else, and I would bring it home. I would sneak in to my mother and my sister and brothers.
How did you sneak out?
Well, I was able to, at night, they would sneak out. They couldn't guard the whole barbed wire ghetto. I mean, they had 2 gates, and there were mostly the gates, and so I was able to do that. And one day I was working for this farmer. He said to me in Ukrainian, he says, whether you like to listen or not, I used to remember that word by word in Ukrainian, and I forgot it. He says, well, whether you like to listen or not, I will tell you a story. He said, they're digging a grave in Ostrozhets. They're going to kill the Jews. I mean, those are the words, if I translate it from Ukrainian, I still remember that. Well, when I heard that, I dumped everything and I ran back to where my mother was. I thought, gosh, I don't want her to die without me. And I ran like crazy, and I came by the cemetery from that little town. It just happened, that direction was the cemetery. When I got to the cemetery, I saw all these men digging this grave, this huge grave. And it kind of made me sick. I felt so bad, I couldn't go through. There was like a road by the cemetery. I just bypassed that. And I came into the little town, and my mother saw me. She was upset because she thought I should stay there or escape, and I said, no way, whatever is going to happen with you, it's going to happen with me. And we stayed there for several days. One time, my mother and my sister, my little brother, and myself. My next older brother was already working in a labor camp. They had some labor camps nearby, so that's what he was working. He was like 15. So we tried to get out and escape, and they caught us right, but just 200 yards. They made us go back. And we were waiting day after day. We knew we were going to get killed. There's really nothing you could do. You were waiting. So one day, it was in the afternoon, my mother says to me, she says, "Come here, let's go." And she brings me up to, there's a road and the barbed wires. And she says, "I want you to get on with this farmer." There was a horse and buggy just right next. I said, "I'm not going." She just persuaded me to do that, to get on that wagon. She paid him, she gave him things, and he was waiting. So I got on in the wagon, the guy took off, and maybe a half a kilometer, just soon outside, he stopped his wagon and horse. Stopped his horse and wagon, and I got the idea that I got to get off. So here I am. I'm walking. There's a road near a village. And I don't know where to go, what to do, and it was just awful.
How old were you then?
That time I was 12 years old. And I remember the first little village, it was, just like a little, I don't know how many farmhouses. That's all these villages were, farmers mostly. And kids, young kids, were throwing rocks at me. They knew that I was Jewish, I guess. There's no other kids that will just come into another village and walk through. They not that it was written that I was Jewish, but they knew that. So I just wandered day after day. I cried. Used to walk by the banks of the rivers where people wouldn't see me. And I remember the first night, where am I going to stay? So on the outside was a stag of straw, and I just made a hole, got in there, and I spent all night. And then most of the day, and I come out when it was dark. I needed some food, so I knocked on it. People gave me some bread. From then on, it just wandered day and night. Night, if I find a place, I would, mostly a barn. And
Did you only wander at nighttime, or?
Well, I did it daytime too, but mostly in areas where it's sort of, like I said, but mostly at night.
And how did you get food?
Okay, at first, I tried to look up some people that I knew. We had a woman, when I was a kid, we had this lady working for us. She was a young woman, and she raised us practically. I knew what village she was in, and I thought maybe, she spoke Yiddish just like we did. I thought she was part of the family. I never knew that she was a helper until later. And I knew where she lived, and I found out where she lived. I went to see her, and I thought, well, maybe she'll keep me, She was afraid. She kept me one night. And after that, I went to another friend of my dad's that he used to do business with, and he had a lot of friends who were Poles, mostly Polish, Ukrainian, some Ukrainians that he used to deal with. I went to them, and they kept me for a couple days, and they were afraid. So that's all I had to do is just wonder. And this went on for weeks and months. And one time,
Is this winter, summer?
I was in wintertime. I hardly have any, there's no warm clothes. I had very little clothes on. This was late in the fall. This was late in the fall that time, and I walked so far now from Mostrozets. I don't know how many miles. A Ukrainian family, this man said to me, he says, if you go to this village, he says, there's some Jews who, from Lutsk or somewhere, he says, who survived, and they're not going to kill him anymore. That's what he tells me. Well, I listened to him. Whether it's true or not didn't matter, but I thought, well, I'll be among Jews maybe, for a while. And I got there, and it was a place that a Polish count once lived, and he had, I don't know how many thousands of acres, and this was governed by a German lieutenant, and he had maybe 300 Jewish families, and they worked on that farm. When I get there was on a Friday night, and they were making a Sabbath dinner, and I looked and I thought, my gosh, these people are crazy. I mean, you know, here they're open, they're going to die. You know, I mean, soon they're going to kill him. That's how I felt. I looked at it. But nevertheless, I was among people, and somehow I stayed with some people in one room. There was, I don't know how many, maybe 6, 7, maybe. They were preparing for the Sabbath dinner, and this is the first time in my life I had hamburgers out of horse meat. This is, I found out later when it was horse meat. That's, you know, they had a dead horse, and they made, you know. Well, I was there for a couple of weeks, and the lady from that efficiency apartment, I don't know what you could call it, it was like a barrack, but, you know, one room, there was a family, and I was with that family. This woman worked for the German, for this guy who was the head of that farm, huge farm. He told her that they're going to kill the rest of it. They're going to come tomorrow or tonight, and they're going to kill the rest of the Jews. And she comes back and tells us that. So here all night, we didn't go to sleep, and it's so strange that nobody made a move. They're just sitting and waiting. I mean, where do you really go? I mean, there's nobody that would welcome you or hide or whatever. And we heard the sounds of trucks. This was on a hill, and we saw lights from like trucks. You know, there were no cars in that area at all, unless something just coming through, soldiers or anything. So we knew there was something going on early in the morning. Well, 7 o'clock in the morning, around 7 o'clock, I go outside and I see place, people are screaming, are yelling, women, children. And I start going downhill. There were some Ukrainian police. They were in uniform with rifles pointing, and I wanted to go down the road. I decided to escape, I don't know, at that time, and they pushed me back. And I still remember I could smell the booze, the alcohol that they were drinking, you know, like all night probably.
The German
you know,
soldiers.
these were the Ukrainians, yeah, the police. They came from Lutz. And if I could draw a picture of that, it's a pretty good sized area. On top of the flat was a lot of buildings, and there was this mansion in the wooded area, and there's and I just can't get over there was already a turmoil. I mean, people couldn't find their children. Mothers were looking for their children. It was, I mean, screams and yells. The place was totally surrounded. So I started running from one place to the other. I mean, I had no family. I had nothing, you know, to worry about that. And there was a fence, a picket fence, and a couple of men broke out that fence, and I followed, and I ran out, and it was all plowed fields. I mean, once you're out of there. And bullets were flying all over, and I was running like crazy. I was running all day long, and I tried to stay with these two men, you know, just because and they didn't want no part of that. I mean, you know, they didn't want a kid dragging after them. Somehow they lost me. So I was there all day long. I mean, I was running all day long, and slept somewhere in the field that night.
Do you know what happened to the whole?
Well, until a couple days later, there was nothing else. I mean, I didn't know what to do, where to go. And another farmer says there were a few people survived, he says. And I don't think they're going to kill those who survived. It's like, once you survive, you made it. I mean, that's how he made me believe. Well, I come back to the same place. I don't know, it took me a whole day. And I get back, and there were about 8 or 10 survivors. 10 people, I think. 2 of them they were lying down, a brother and sister. Their feet were frozen and it was what do you call decay, more or less, and you could even smell that. He was like 22, and she was a very attractive woman, maybe 20. So they were part of that group who survived. I don't know how.
Where was the rest of it?
And the rest of them were killed. There was a huge grave. I walked in one of the buildings and I saw all that clothes of these people. In fact, I tried to find something so I can wear. I mean, it's just, it was an awful feeling to see all this clothes, men, women, and children. And you see this huge, fresh dirt outside.
When you say the clothes, are you saying they made
clothes? I mean, they undressed, yes,
them?
exactly, yeah. They dropped off all their clothes. So we stayed in that building. I don't know.
How many people were there that got killed in that area?
But maybe 300, I don't know. Maybe, but I would think that many. And here's 10 of us. One night, while we were there, 2 policemen come in. See, otherwise we didn't have anybody there. Just the 2 policemen came in, and they made us get out of the house, the place. They lined us up at a wall. They're going to shoot us. The man at the end took off. It was dark. One guy ran after him, and right in back of that building was already plowed dirt, so it was dark. It's hard. So he fired after him, and the other guy was guarding maybe 7 of us, 8. I don't remember exactly. I begged him. I said, "Please let me go." And he says, "Okay, run, little one." Just like that. So I took off and ran in the back. And I could barely see this other guy, and I was after him, and I caught up with him. He was probably in his early 20s. He was very fast. And all night we wandered. We came into a village. It was a Czech village, and we stopped in one of the houses, and they fed us for breakfast. And I remember there was a road, and after rain it was very muddy, and there was like, instead of sidewalks, like paths on each side of the road. So he and I were just leaving the village, and it was just like almost the last house. We see a guy chasing us. So this older guy, I mean, really took off. He was running pretty fast. I don't know whether it was harder for me. I was running. But this man passed me up already. He was on the other side of the road. I was on this side of the road, going the same direction. He was chasing. He wanted to catch the bigger guy. And the SS come in. They come in for that. They do that. They do that dirty work. But
did you see the SS that night before you?
No, I didn't, because I didn't see him then. See, they do so at that time there could have been a truck, with I don't know how many SS, 4 or 5 SS, and they do the shooting. And the rest of them, were all Ukrainian police. They came from the city of Lutsk. Okay, where are we? So while he came so close, like almost grabbed me, and I made a dive in straw. It's hard to explain how that was, but right after harvest, there's a lot of stags of straw. This, was a big farm, and he came right near me, and he couldn't find me. It's like, like a needle in a haystack. That's basically what it was. I made a dive. I didn't move. because I hoped that I was totally covered. And this went on this was early in the morning, right after breakfast, and went on almost till 11 o'clock. I could, the dogs were continually barking.
11 o'clock in the morning or in the evening?
11 o'clock in the morning. It's for about 2-3 hours. He was, 2 hours maybe he was looking.
Right.
But, and then sudden things got quiet. The dogs, I could tell, the dogs quit barking, so he's gone. He's gone. While he was gone, I made a deeper hole and I buried myself in the straw, and I thought I'm in better condition now if something would happen. Well, he did come back in the afternoon, and the same thing, the dogs, and I hear sounds, I hear people talking. He asked these people, the farmer, they had no idea what happened. They didn't know anything. And here, so this went on. I stayed there all day long, and I didn't really know when it was night, but I could tell when they feed the chickens and all that kind of thing, it's getting darker. And I thought it was already dark, and I stuck my head out, and there was this girl come in to pick some straw for the barn. That's what they do. And she saw me, I scared her to death, and she ran off. And when she ran off, I started running myself on that fields. Normally there was, black fields. It was all plowed, and the dirt was very dark, and that part of the country was like the wheat basket. So and when it gets dark, nobody sees me. So I was running all night. And I got to a place where I saw a farm, and I got in at a barn, and I get in and I hide myself, and the dog started barking all night. He smelled me, and I thought, God, and I just wondered what's going to happen. He got tired, and he quit barking. I stayed all night there, and I don't know, the whole day, and the next day I moved somewhere else. And this went on and on and on.
Where were you going? From where to where?
From village to village. There was just,
From barn to barn?
from place to place. I would ask for food. Believe me, I couldn't find the place I was there a night before. It's farm villages, and it's hard to explain. It's not like a little town. It's just a road, and you may have a dozen houses and maybe some less, and it's what they call a selo in Ukrainian. It means like a village.
Were people really willing to give you food, or did you
At night, they gave me some things to, some felt sorry for me. Some, if it was very cold, they let me stay a little, get warmed. Sometimes I had a meal, and sometimes they just give me bread, most of it bread, and they were afraid, so I took off. And this went on
For how long?
This was already in the, this was still in the fall of '42, and then the winter came along, and there was a struggle being without much clothes. There were some people, I remember a place where they kept me. It was like it was an awful, it was a deep snow, and it was so cold, and it was blowing and like crazy. And I found this house at the edge of a village, just looked like an old little beat up little house. And there was this woman with, I don't know, a couple of children. Her husband worked in a flour mill, and she let me stay for several days. It was so cold, so I stayed there. And I remember she would do a lot of baking. It was so poor, all they had is flour. They didn't have salt or sugar, and I don't know how whatever she made, flour they had, because he would bring home flour from the flour mill, but really not much else. Potatoes. I stayed there for a while. Later on, I came to a Czech village, and I went into this place, and and this guy was looking for somebody to work. And I don't know how, somebody told me that. I don't remember exactly how and what. But when I got there and talked to him, he was the head of the village. He had a couple of horses, about 3 cows. And he would prefer that I don't tell him who I was. He didn't want me, to say I'm Jewish. He would rather not. He didn't want to hear about it. So I was not supposed to be Jewish. He knew I was. He didn't want me to say that to him. So if anything happens, he's in the clear. So I started working for him, taking the cows out on pasture. And then I found there was another Jewish kid in this village also doing the same thing. We befriended, and we got to see each other at night. Well, one day they caught him. The police came. Ukrainian police got him. And I knew once they got him, he'll tell on me because they're going to torture him. And I expected that. So I was told that they just caught him, so I took off. I didn't wait very long, and they came after me, and I was already gone. I was right in the fields at that time. I could run in a wheat field, and you couldn't see me. I was little, and wheat fields were high. So from then on, I started hiding again.
Is this in the winter now?
This was already, past the winter. I lived through the winter. This was already in the spring and the summer. This was in the summer. In fact, it was late in the summer. I skipped. And I started hiding. I ran into another Jewish man, and he and I stayed together. We were in a barn, hid in straw. People didn't know that we were there. I would go into the same people and ask for food, and they would ask me where I am, because they knew me on that village, because I worked there, and I would tell them I'm somewhere else, miles away. And what happened, and then there was a third man, so
the same people that you're sleeping in their barn, hiding in the hay, you would ask food from them?
Yeah, I would, to them or other places, but occasionally I would come in and say, and they said, they felt sorry for me, they knew me and all that, and they asked me where I am, and of course I wasn't going to tell them where I was, especially in their place, so they had no idea that I was there, and
Right.
And then we ran into a third guy. Well, and we all three were hidden in the same place.
Are these other people Jewish children? Or?
Jewish man. No, these were, one was already had a family, a wife and 2 children, and they killed his wife and 2 children. And that man buried his own children. His own 2 children was 8 and 10-year-old. And this man was with me. Somehow the farmers feared him because he's a big guy. He lived on a farm, Jewish man. So we became, I was together, part of it. They found out, the Ukrainians, the Banderovцы they used to be, and they found out there were 3 Jews in this village. And they looked for us all the time. They knew about us. So it was getting so bad that they decided, all 3 of us decided that we're going to make a hiding place somewhere in the field, in the open field. And we worked on that. We dug a hole, and we made it, just perfect. We had a big basket, and we filled it with dirt. When the last person got in, we pulled that basket down. You couldn't tell. Well, there was one guy to double check that, so it worked out perfectly. The day we were supposed to go, the next day, to hide in the field, because it was getting awfully, we didn't know where to hide anymore in the villages because they were looking all the time, and we were afraid. So the day we were supposed to go, I said, I'm not going. And just I thought I'll rather be hidden where I am rather than go on the field. For some reason, like something told me not to do that. Now, these older guys were very angry. I mean, you know, here we did all this, and I say I don't want to go. So they were very angry. They could have probably killed me if they, you know, because they wanted to go, and I said no. Well, we didn't go, and the next day there were Ukrainian police found the place, and they came. We were told they had a machine gun. They thought we were there, and we were not there. And this was the amazing thing. I mean, it's like you get these instincts and feelings, and it's like something tells you. So this was close. The war. This was already. I skipped some time. This is the year. I think the winter of '44. I want to tell you an incident that happened in the winter before. I was wandering from village to village, and there was a lot of snow, and it was like a Saturday evening. I remember, you know, it was getting dark because people light these kerosene lamps. And I was walking, can hardly see the road, but the snow must have been like 2 feet or deep. And I saw towards me this man coming. Whenever you see anybody, I was scared. And he came on right directly. He says, "Where are you going?" Now, if there was a God, he was there at that time, because there's times I didn't think there was a God, because why killed my parents, or my parents were killed, my little brother, 3 years old. And he says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going home." "Where's your home?" And I named the village. My Ukrainian was very good. I mean, I spoke like a native. And he said, "Where were you?" I say, "At my uncle's." I mean, you know, my flow speed was so fluent, it just, I mean, I couldn't, you know, just words like was giving to me.
Where'd you learn Ukrainian?
Well, I lived in Ukraine. In the 3rd grade, I was one of 2 Jewish kids, took Ukrainian. But I spoke Ukrainian, but I could read and write. And, you know, at that time, I used to write letters for these Ukrainians. They had their sons and daughters in Germany, in some of these camps, in the factories working. I used to read and write letters for them. They let me stay. They gave me food or something like that. So he says, "Okay, better go home." And something told me there was the wrong guy. There was a guy who was looking for me. I mean, you know, he knew there was some Jewish kid. In the first house I saw, I ran inside, and I was out of breath. I was scared to death. And the people said to me, "You ran into Medinsky." He says, "He just left our house." So he was going, you know, we were crossing each other. So there was a time that if I didn't answer that, I would have never made it.
Why? Because who's Medinsky?
He was the guy, I forgot what they call these guys. You know, he turns over a Jewish person, a Jew. He gets paid for it.
Oh, he was like a bounty hunter.
Yes, a bounty hunter, right. That's exactly what he was, yes. So we knew about it. People would tell you about it, but, you know, I never walked daytime, you know. On this occasion, it was winter. I was crossing from one village to another. So now, okay, back to where we were hiding with my friends, and I mean with these 2 men. I was the one used to go out and get food for them because they were afraid to be visible. You know, I'm a little guy, a kid, and I could get away with that. And it's amazing some of the things we used to do to get food. He was good. We used to go to some of these farmers and we learned how to get chickens, you know, chickens at night when they sleep. You got to do it very quickly. Just grab him by their little neck so they don't make sounds. And we would do that. And there was this old woman that this man knew, that she was very poor, and we would supply the chicken, so she would have food and we would have food, you know, on occasions. There was, and there's other things in order to survive.
How long were you with these two men?
I was there, I was with them, I don't know, 7, 8 months, something like that. Then in the end of 44, the Russian army came through. Russian army went through our village, and we thought, boy, that's it, you know, we are free. But they came through, and sudden, you know, nothing happened. They went through. So we were still in hiding, and a few days back, somehow they retreated. So I thought then I got out from hiding and I ran with them. I mean, I tried to follow the Russian army. They were going to the city of Lutsk. And this was the winter. It was an awful winter, and I had a pair of rubber shoes that was a lady's shoes. I mean, rubber, like goulashes, they call that, and that's what I had on that winter, and very little, not even an overcoat. I don't know how I didn't freeze. And all night, walking with them, just following the Russian army. They were mostly on horses and wagons and dragon artillery. It was some kind of an infantry or part of a unit that they went somewhere, and either they called them back to go to another front. I don't know what happened, because we didn't hear any shooting or anything like it. Just a few days they retreated, and we went with them. I went with them. I don't know what happened to the other two guys. I lost him then. I came to the city of Lutsk.
You don't even know how you ended up splitting up with these?
No, I don't remember exactly how, but I think I followed with the Russians, and I don't know what they did, whether they stayed further, longer. I don't remember exactly what happened.
You've never talked to them since then?
No. I came to the city of Lutsk, and here is a battle. I saw there was also the river crosses the city, and I saw the Germans on one side, the Russians on the other side. I was like the only civilian kid somewhere in the city. I mean, you know, all soldiers. I've seen, this was in wintertime, I've seen dogs dragging sled and wounded people. I've seen dead horses, dead people. And somehow I had I don't know what it was, that my whole body broke out, but I guess from lice and dirt and all that. So they told me I should go to the hospital. There was a hospital, and I was in a hospital for about 3 days. They treated me for some, and then I came out, and the battle was right there in the city. And I hitchhiked Russian army trucks, and they took me to the city of Rovno, which was further east, you know. And that's when I met my cousin, the one who survived. Remember I said that who survived this Holocaust. He was about 3 years older, 2 years older. And
how'd you meet him?
I ran into him in the city. You know, there was a gathering where most of the Jewish survivors, the few, you know, found out very quickly. So he was one of them. He was with the partisans. But you know, somehow he got with them, and that's how he survived. But he wanted to take revenge, so he volunteered in the Russian army. He was 17. And he went on the front, and he never came back. I'll show you a picture of him. He sent me when he was in the army. And what happened then is they put me in an orphanage home. I was there for about a week. I just couldn't take that, so I got out of there, escaped, and somebody told me that if I go to the city and buy certain, you know, something, I could bring it to this city and sell it to make a little money. He loaned me some few dollars, and I did that. And I started doing a little black market. I was about 14, 15 at that time, and I was just following, mostly hitchhiking in army trucks. And I did that. Then they put me in jail because I was, black market was not allowed. Of course, you couldn't buy anything in legitimate stores. There was, I didn't want to be an orphanage house. So,
Who put you in jail?
well, the Russian police, right? They saw kids. They put me together with pickpockets and and all that, and they were going to send us to an orphanage. So I got through a window, got out of the jail.
Escaped from the jail.
Escaped from the jail. I was there for about a day or so. I mean, I wasn't really afraid of anything at that time. It didn't mean anything. I just, I went through all this. So, and at that time we were allowed, if you're a Polish citizen, you could go to Poland. So I went and had papers, came to Poland, from Poland to Germany, and somehow I was in Germany for about 2 years. My relatives in the United States found out about me, and they wanted me to come. So this is part of the story. I mean, I skipped a lot.
How did your relatives find out about you?
They found out through someone else who came earlier to the United States. He saw me in the city of Rovno when I was doing a little market, and they said that I was a wheeler and dealer. And so when they found out where I was, I had a first telephone call I had in 1947. They called me to the telephone, which is like going through the moon, that my uncle on the phone, and he said that for me to register to the United States. I want to go to Israel, to be honest with you. So, and I remembered my aunt. She visited us when I was about 6 years old. Well, I ended up coming here.
No, you say 1947 is when you left?
Well, in 1948 I came, yeah.
Where were you staying from 44 to 48 after the war?
44, I was out in Poland. I was in different places with different people, and then in Germany I stayed with another family. I mean, there was a woman with her son. They were my age during the war. They were in Russia. So that's how, and they went to Israel, and I went to the United States, but I stayed with them.
You stayed with strangers?
And well, we became family. I mean,
But you didn't know them before that?
I didn't, no. We became very close.
The people took you in?
Yes. Well, we were in a displaced person camp, right after the war in 1945. They had these camps in Germany set up for the survivors from concentration camps and all kind of survivors. So they had these DP camps, they called them, and they had some schools for some of them. So I was in school, also technical school while I was there, and fed by the UNRWA, UNRA organization, or the joint distribution, supported by them. So that was okay. Just waiting to leave Germany. Most people, some people went to the United States, Canada, some people went to Israel. So in 1948, I came to the United States, and in 1948, I was in high school. I graduated in 51, and I was already had draft papers while I was in high school.
Where'd you go to high school?
At East High School. And I graduated in June. In July, I was in the Army, and they sent me back to Germany. I was in Germany after 48, 51, less than 3 years. So I served during the Korean War in Germany.
When you were in the United States, did you stay with your...
Yeah, I stayed with my aunt. I lived with my aunt till I come out of the Army, and I was in school, but I went to Ohio State for a while. Then I had to go. I went at night. I worked at Lazarus.
You worked at Lazarus for how many years?
37 years.
37 years, and you got married?
And well, yes, I got married. And I had a son, and a daughter. My son is 26, daughter is 23. I've been divorced for 10 years, 11 years. Now I'm retired, and
Tell us about the reunion with your brother.
oh, that's, yeah, I skipped that, didn't I? Okay, in 1974, I got a letter, found a letter that came to the Jewish Family Service, and it was written Wolman, Gallen, that's my family, and Herbert Wolman, which is a cousin, was in the. He says, "Give this to Irv Miller," and that was a letter from my brother. So through the Swiss Red Cross, they found me here. So in '74, I tell you, I couldn't believe it. I was so happy, and I didn't know how to. I couldn't write Russian, so I remember some Yiddish. I wrote them in Yiddish. I mean, I didn't really think I could even write. I wrote a short letter in Yiddish, so we started communicating. In '74, and then 6 months later, I went to Russia to see my brothers. Well, it's too bad I don't have the pictures right here to show you how I remembered my brother. You know, he was my brother. My oldest brother was 19. My other one was 18 or 17. That's how I remember them. And so I get to, when I left New York, the trip was, we were supposed to go to Leningrad, stop in Moscow, and go to Leningrad after that. Well, I wrote my brothers that I'll be in Leningrad, and they got a hotel room and waiting for me. Well, we get to Moscow, and they says, no, we're going to stay 3 days in Moscow. We're not going to Leningrad. See, they always did that. They tell you one thing, and they never. So here, my God, I thought I'm going to, anxiety, I couldn't take it. Here they're waiting for me. I'm so anxious to see him, and it'll be 3 more days before I get to see him. So I tried to make a phone call. It was just almost impossible. Finally got the hotel, and they said they are not there. This is a whole day long. We tried that, and I had an interpreter, a Jewish woman who spoke fluent Russian. And finally we got them on the phone like 11 o'clock at night. They spent the whole day in Leningrad at the airport waiting for me. So when they got a hotel room at 11 o'clock, I finally got to talk with them. So I tell them what happens. I got to stay 3 days in Moscow. And I said, he said, well, we'll just wait for you. So the next morning we have breakfast. And there's this man coming in, and he says, Miller? I said, yes. He says, there's a phone call for you. So we're having breakfast. He said, oh, just you could eat your breakfast. I thought, this guy was stupid. I said, you know, they're on the phone. So I get through this hotel. It's a bigger hotel, and I get to the mezzanine, and I see these 2 men standing. They were my brothers. They decided not to wait 3 days. They took a train, an all-night train, and they came the next day. So here I see my brothers after 35 years. And I can't communicate with them. I can't talk to my brothers. I mean, they looked down at me. They were taller than I am, both of them, I guess. I got caught by the age of 12 from all this good life. You know, I didn't see daylight for days, and no food, no anything. So they were kind of, they probably wondered what I looked like. And here I am, a little guy, and you know.
Did you recognize him?
Yeah, I mean, I had already a picture. They sent me a picture, you know, before I went there.
They were in their 50s?
And they were, yes, in their 50s. Well, let's see. My older brother just turned 75, and this was in 75. This was 75, 20 years, so he was 55. He was 55 years old, and the other one was 53. So I mean, but the picture I always had is that mental picture that when he was 20 and or 19, and the other one was 17 or 18. So here we spent. I mean, we had an interpreter. I mean, we couldn't communicate. I mean, how frustrating that is. Your own brothers, and you can't speak to them. That's that's tough to even explain. Well, after a couple days with him, we stayed in the same hotel. They happened to stay in the same hotel, the same room. And I tried to talk a little Yiddish, a little Russian. I was already learning some more Russian, with tapes and all that. And we start communicating a little bit. And the Yiddish, their Yiddish, they totally forgot. I mean, actually they were older. They knew it better than I did. But they hadn't spoken in 35 years. But slowly it started coming back. So we spent 7, 8 days together. I was part of a group on a tour, and they went with me. Then 75, 10 years later, I went to see him again. And I tried to tell him to come and ask him to come, and at that time they didn't want to. One of my brothers was married. The other one had a daughter, and he already had granddaughter. So in '85 I saw him again, and then in '90, I went my third trip. That time my brother was very ill, the second of the two. He was very ill. He had heart problems. He had sugar diabetes, and he was really suffering. And I think if I waited longer, he probably would have never made it. He said to me that I gave him life. I gave him, he lived to see me. And he says, he died about 3 years ago. And my other brother, my oldest brother, who was 75, went to Israel with my great niece, and he lives in Israel. He was here in the spring, and I saw him in Israel.
You still have one brother in Israel?
So I have, no, the one in Russia died about 3 years ago.
Oh.
So he died. Now his daughter is here.